Okay, folks, I'd like to welcome you to our 2020 Lunar Development Conference. We're really excited that you're here, and we're looking forward to a great event. Thanks for everyone who's helped us plan this out. It was a really quick 3-month from the idea till today, and we feel like we put together a great event. We're very excited about it. So first, let me walk you through a couple of housekeeping items. We have 41 speakers at this 2-day event. We'll have keynotes in the morning and evening, and we'll have some afternoon track sessions. We're using Zoom extensively for this, and the keynotes will be using Zoom webinars. So for those, you'll use the Q&A feature, and the session tracks will be using Zoom meetings. So those will be more open, where folks can unmute and ask questions. We still will encourage you to use the chat feature and queue those questions up. We'll have volunteers in all of the sessions to help out. And, you know, again, we're just really thrilled about this. This is the first of a series for us of doing this conference. This is the first conference the Moon Society has organized since our 2000 founding conference. There was a series called the Lunar Development Conference that was organized primarily by the Space Frontier Foundation, and they're partners with us on this event, and we're proud to be continuing this tradition. So we hope that we can all have a good event. We want to record all the sessions so that we can put them up on YouTube, and we want to make sure that we are able to have a good audio for all the speakers. So we'll be asking conference attendees to keep their video off to conserve bandwidth and to stay on mute unless they're asking a question, unless they've been prompted to do that. And if there is any disruptive behavior, we will have volunteers that'll just kind of help police the Zoom call. So, you know, we want to have a great event, and we're looking forward to your participation with that. We have a virtual experience with Eventory that is our technical partner on this event. And you can, if you're an attendee, you can log into this experience on either a desktop computer or a mobile app. And we've made it really easy for you to find all the sessions. You can manage your own schedule. You also can find other attendees' profiles and connect with people. We want this conference to feel like it's an in-person conference, even though it's all virtual. So you'll be able to find someone else's profile, request to be friends with them, like Facebook. And then once you guys are friends, you can message each other using the mobile app, and you can also schedule meetings with each other. So trying to promote some of that networking that we always like to have at conferences in our industry. Also, we will have networking hours as part of our schedule. So during the noon hour today and the 5 o'clock hour, there'll be 4 Zoom rooms that people can freely join. Each one has a topic, and they can switch between them to meet people and to see what's going on in the other rooms. So we encourage, that's another way to network and try to meet new people and have a good community around this conference. So if you have any questions or need help getting into the virtual experience or encounter any other problems, you can email us. There's the email address right there. And then also we have a Slack discussion channels that the Moon Society uses. And all the attendees are welcome to join those. And there's the URL to get into that. So with that, I'd like to welcome into the meeting Michael Mealing.
Hi, everybody.
So Michael Mealing, you're the president of the Moon Society, general partner at Starbridge Capital, CEO of the Waypaver Foundation. Michael, it's 2020. Where are the moon bases? Man, I want to go to the moon. I want to take my family. It's 3 days away. It's a great week trip, right? 3 days there, spend a night, come back. Where is it? It's 2020. What's going on?
Well, the thing that I've spent the past several years understanding, being in venture capital for my day job, is without the customers, it's very difficult to make these things work. We are talking large sums of money to get some of this stuff set up. And as we're seeing with LEO commercialization, especially the how long it's taking to do LEO tourism, insert your favorite euphemism for tourism in that sentence. It is a little bit harder than we thought it was going to be. As we learned at Masten Space Systems when we started that back in 2004, everything in space takes longer than you think it will. And so as I'm going to get into in my keynote shortly, there are several things that we need to be working on in the industry, and a lot of these need to be done at the same time in order to be able to enable those. And so the biggest one is customers, and I'll get into that a little bit later.
Well, it must be a proud day for you, though. You've co-founded Masten, and our keynote right after you is the CEO of Masten, Sean Mahoney, who's they've just won a contract with NASA to land a payload on the moon next year. It's got to be a good time for you.
It is. So I started with Dave and John Goff and Pierce Nichols and a few others back in 2004. And then I ended up hiring Colin Ake and Sean Mahoney back then to help us out. And now Sean is the CEO, and it's in good hands, and it's been a long, hard slog. One of the things that lessons that I kind of learned from Masten is usually in a business, sometimes the last man standing is the one that wins. And of all of the companies that started back then, going after the Northrop Grumman Lunar Lander Challenge, and even the suborbital tourism business and suborbital cargo business that still hasn't really started. Masten really is one of the few that's still standing, and that means you have now the opportunities to yourself, but you also have the experience of 14 years of working this problem really, really well. And so yeah, when they won the contract, it was kind of vindication, because as Dave always said way back then, the ultimate goal for Masten Space Systems was to be an extraterrestrial lander company. The suborbital stuff we were doing was what was going to pay the bills to get us there. And it is a bit of vindication to be able to get that contract. Obviously, we all wish it had happened sooner, but it is what it is. And now comes the hard part, the truly hard part. The surface of the moon is littered with people that have tried, and it takes a few times to do it. So fingers crossed, it's a really great team. And it's a great team with a lot of operational experience. So I've got a lot of confidence in the team, and yeah, I expect to see Dave's name plastered all over the surface of the moon here in a year or so.
Yeah, and for us at the Moon Society, it's a proud day to be organizing this conference. We were founded first as the Artemis Society back in the mid-1990s. And the name Artemis now resonates with the moon because NASA has named their program Artemis. There was also a really good book by Andy Weir that came out a couple years ago that's now being made into a movie with Rosario Dawson as the lead. So, I feel like we're kind of all part of that, right?
I know, and they didn't call us and ask us for permission to use the name either, so I'm kind of bummed about that. But hey, we'll let them have it.
Hey, great minds think alike, so exactly. It's all good. Well, I'm going to go ahead and give you the main stage now, Michael. Again, welcome everybody to the 2020 Lunar Development Conference. I hope you have a great event, and I'll be back for the Q&A.
Great, thanks, James. So the part of my talk today is going to be a little bit of cheerleading, but I'm going to get to some very hard challenges toward the end that I hope everyone keeps in mind as we go through the rest of the next couple of days. And even afterward, as we're thinking about Artemis, we're looking at what we're doing with the moon and what each of us are working on as we're all working toward that same goal. So I'm going to steal a little bit of my introduction from Erwan Benoit, who works for Thales Alenia, who posted this on his blog. Many of you have heard the way of thinking of the moon as kind of the eighth continent. But the way he kind of framed it was fairly unique. He said, imagine that for some very strange reason, we recently discovered a Texas-sized continent smack in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. No one had never known it was there, but all of a sudden we said, wow, there's an entire Texas-sized continent waiting for us to go visit. What would we do? How soon would we visit? Even if it was very hard to live there, wouldn't we even try? We have people living in Antarctica, we have people living in the Arctic, and some of the most inhospitable places on the planet have human beings living in them. Why wouldn't we go there? And so that's a useful way of thinking about the moon. If it's such an easy goal to get to, or an easy goal to wrap your head around, why aren't we there? What is holding us back? And over the past several years, looking at this problem, both from the standpoint of the Moon Society and Waypaver and what it takes to get human development on the lunar surface, but also coming at it from a financial standpoint from running a space technology venture capital fund, it really does boil down to the economics. The moon is hard to get to cheaply. If there were indeed a continent in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, you could get a boat, a reasonably sized large boat could be able to get you there and take everything that you would need to be able to survive. But one of the hardest problems with the moon is it's also hard to stay there, especially if you want to stay there beyond 2 weeks. So I'll get into that in a little bit. So in the first case, how hard is it to get to the moon? There are a lot of launch companies working on fixing this problem, but it's still expensive. A lot of us in the industry are banking on Elon's Starship actually working out as he has planned. Now, a lot of his projections do involve amortizing development costs over a significant number of vehicles over a significant amount of time. But even if it is twice as expensive and takes twice as long, it is still a transformational technology. But the problem that we have found within Starbridge, looking at where the industry is going, one of the things that worries us greatly is we see very few companies planning on taking advantage of the capability that Elon is building. Our fear is that Elon is going to end up building a large number of starships that for many years are going to sit empty because there are no customers that are capable of taking advantage of the entire payload bay and the throw weight of that system. That said, we could see that if you had the sufficient capital, you could get there. The problems that we are seeing, and I think Sean may end up talking about some of this during his talk, is surviving the lunar night. You can get there during the lunar morning and you have about 2 weeks before things get so incredibly cold that everything starts to break. So you have to have some very dense power source capable of keeping everything warm enough that your metals don't embrittle, that your lubricants don't freeze out, that your electronics crack and deform. And so that is one of the biggest obstacles preventing significant lunar development, is short of everyone being able to go out to their favorite space provider and buying off-the-shelf nuclear power sources, we have a lot of engineering to do around how to survive the lunar night. So, but still, let's go forward a little bit and assume that someone has actually started to solve these two problems. And there are smart people working on them. Before we can take things out of the lab and turn them into products that engineers can buy, integrate, and build, we need customers. The customer is the person that is willing to realize that ultimate value proposition of actually wanting to be on the moon badly enough that they're willing to pay the price And right now, the price of getting to the moon, even if we solve the launch and lunar night survivability problems, is still a very large amount of money. And it will stay that way for a while. If you put someone on the moon or some infrastructure on the moon and you're able to generate revenue from that over a long period of time, there are financial tools that make that something that you can end up financing and do. But again, even if you're able to do it over long periods of time or fly people up there for a very expensive stays, you have to find those customers. And that is one of the things that I think the Artemis program and all of the CLIPS companies and anyone that's looking at human lunar development, we have to find those customers. And those customers are not in the space industry. One of the problems that we definitely see across the sector is we have a large number of companies who are trying to sell to other space companies, component companies that say, my value proposition is I make it cheaper for a spacecraft developer to build their spacecraft. While yes, if that spacecraft customer has no customers of their own because the value proposition that they're selling has no one interested in it, then the entire supply chain breaks down. As much as all of us who are attending this conference today would like to be able to go settle on the moon and retire there or build a business there, unless we have a significant number of billionaires at the conference today, most of us cannot afford the prices that are necessary to be able to support what we're trying to build. We have a large number of companies that are looking at the other side of the equation, which is if I'm able to lower the price, lower the costs of developing lunar infrastructure capable of supporting a customer, then that price becomes something that people can afford. And while true, developing lower cost infrastructure is an iterative process. You have to start with someone who's willing to pay for something that's expensive in order to be able to generate the cash flow that allows you to then develop the things that are less expensive. This is what Elon has discovered in SpaceX. The reason he is building Starlink is to be able to generate the free cash flow that allows him to develop Starship. Falcon 9 generated the cash flow that allowed them to do Commercial Crew and build Starlink. So there's a saying that I've been using in the industry for the longest time: the best Delta V accelerator that you can find is free cash flow. If you can find a business that you can make a profit on and you plow that profit back into your business, that is what allows you to do the hard things. You have the luxury of time and money that you don't have to find from investors to be able to invest in solving these problems. But to do that, you have to have customers. And right now, the moon is lacking customers. And so what I would like everyone to think about this week or this weekend is step back from the shiny things that we in the space industry find fun and compelling as engineers, and step back and look at why does someone want to go to the moon? What are the basic human motivations that would cause someone to take their entire life savings and sink it into a week-long stay on the lunar surface, or would cause someone to spend, who may be a billionaire, to take 1/10 of their entire net worth, $100 million, and use that to set up a business or something on the moon that generates revenue? Are there resources or things on the moon that people on Earth are willing to buy? One of the things that has come up with the moon is space resources: water, titanium, aluminum, maybe even rare earth metals. With very few exceptions, space resources only make economic sense when you're using them in space. water ice mined from the lunar poles is used for moving things around the cislunar space and even the inner solar system by using that as a way to get propulsion at the top of the gravity well rather than the bottom. But there is no business case that anyone can make right now that suggests that lunar ice brought back to Earth makes any sense. And so that's my challenge for everyone this weekend, is be thinking about not your colleagues in the space industry, but your family, your friends, the people that you know that think that you're just a little bit weird for doing this moon thing, and find out the things that they might be interested in. Maybe wedding rings based off of lunar titanium and aluminum as a unique wedding present, or Celestis, which is a company that does human burials in space. Maybe putting in your will that you want to be buried on the moon. Things like that, things that generate revenue for our business. We have to get out of the building, out of the industry, and talking to the rest of the economy about the value that the 8th continent that we just discovered can bring to everyone else's lives. And I think that's the challenge that I have for everybody this weekend. And so I'd like to turn it over to some Q&A if James could help me out and see if there's anyone out there interested in asking questions or telling me that I'm full of it. So
folks, go ahead and click on the Q&A button on your Zoom call, and you can ask a question, and Michael will go ahead and answer it.
Sure. And I am very happy to see a large number of people in the attendees window over here. So
yeah, we've got a lot of interest in this conference so far.
And before somebody raises their hand, I do want to thank James and the rest of the team at Moon Society for putting this together. James has done, James and Ben and everyone else on the executive team has just gone above and beyond. So thank you very much.
Appreciate it, Michael. This is a fun event to put together. You know, a lot of us were excited about the ISDC conference back in May that we were planning for. We were helping with some of the tracks there, but unfortunately, due to the situation in the world, that got canceled. And so we figured, why don't we try doing our own event? And look, here we are.
So we have a question from Rui Rosenthal. I'm going to take you off mute.
Hi, Michael. My name is Rui Rosenthal, as you told. I am from Israel.
Hi. Thank
you. The big question is, as I understood from what you were speaking, about engineering and commercial, industrial, we are missing a great part of marketing on this moon stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So who could take care of that?
There are a couple of new space-oriented marketing companies. In the UK, there's a company called Astro Agency. Megan Crawford here in the US has Delta V, which is her marketing and branding company. She also works with Space Fund along with Rick Tumlinson, which is another venture capital fund in the space industry that we work with quite a bit. And there are some very large marketing agencies out there that over the years have been very willing to work with not just NASA, but the rest of the industry on advocating for space and actually helping people formulate that value proposition in a way that customers can understand it and relate to it. And I think there's a lot of interest even from those larger agencies to help us out with that. It's just they need something concrete to be able to wrap that story around. And in a lot of cases, I think the problem has been that we in the industry do a very poor job of listening to customers. There's a concept in business that has really developed on, at least on the technology side over the past 15 or so years, called customer discovery. And that is where you may have a general idea of the business you want to be in, but before you start building anything, you need to sit down with the customers that you think you want to serve and listen to them. And I think the space industry has done a pretty bad job at listening to people who are outside of the space industry. Like I mentioned, we're very insular. And I think that's where marketing agencies, traditional ones, can help. I know Megan has helped many people. I know the folks over at Astro Agency over in the UK do a fair bit of this. And it really is about understanding the basic motivations and needs of the people we're talking to. And then once we have a good enough story around that, those marketing agencies can really help us craft a message that can be sold. But first, we really do need to start talking to those customers directly. And there are people in the industry that can help you do that. I would suggest both Delta V and Astro Agency, and there are others too, but those are the two that come to mind.
Okay,
Michael.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, Michael, a question from Calvin Gluck. Aren't there minerals and resources on the moon that are worth their acquisition cost and cargo weight already? For example, helium-3?
Except that no one knows what to do with helium-3. Right now, there is a small market for helium-3 in certain very specific scientific and even commercial applications, but the amount needed doesn't justify the effort, because even if you look at the amount of helium-3 those two markets can absorb, one mission would definitely be far more expensive to gather that little bit of helium-3 to serve that market, that you would crash that market and the prices, and the mission itself would not actually generate profit, so it wouldn't be sustainable. There are a lot of materials on the moon that have value, but they're not competitive with materials that we are able to extract here. And that has to do with the supply chains and infrastructure that exists here that make that entire process cost effective to do down here. There is a story to be told, a very long-term one, around over time, the cost of extracting materials and recycling materials on the Earth becomes more expensive as the demand grows, population grows, and the losses from recycling and the ability to be able to extract them goes up. For example, in the mining industry, about 60% of the cost of a mine is tied up in the human capital for actually putting people in the mine to extract the material. There's a great company called Offworld AI and several others that are looking to create purely robotically run mines, not a single human being anywhere near the mine, much less the rock face. And so that entire business allows you to extract a large amount of value and material that you can move into the supply chain at even lowering prices. So even as the demand curve goes up over time, as demand goes up, using robotics, our costs are dropping. So it's very difficult for lunar resources, titanium, aluminum, some of the other, maybe there could be a case for certain rare earth elements if we can find them in sufficient concentrations on the lunar surface. And right now, we don't know the answer to that. But right now, none of the economic models that I've seen put the value of lunar resources back on the surface of the Earth being remotely profitable.
And wouldn't rare earths kind of be a priority for the United States right now?
It is, and that's one of the reasons why, is because it has strategic value that goes beyond just its usability value. One of the reasons why there are a lot of rare earth deposits even in the United States, but in a lot of cases, those rare earth elements are also embedded in radioactive ore deposits. And so the extraction costs are very high. And so that's why they're not economically viable yet to use those deposits. And so you can kind of make that a corollary to rare earth deposits on the moon, whether it's a radioactive ore deposit for rare earth elements here, or you have to go all the way to the moon to get them and bring them back. The costs of both of those together are somewhat equal enough that you can see how those existing earth-based rare earth deposits still aren't economically feasible to extract.
Next question is from Ken Galkin. Ken, would you like to ask your question? His question, if he doesn't unmute in a second here. Ken, his question is, how is developing the moon the same as and different than developing Antarctica?
Even with Antarctica, the transportation costs are significantly lower. We have boats that regularly go to Antarctica. Because of the treaties, you're not allowed to go there unless you're part of one of the government research teams. But there's a secret in the tourism industry that there are many boats and private cruises that go around the Antarctic coast that regularly drop off tourists on the shores of Antarctica, many hundreds of them during a given season. And so Antarctica is still easy to get to. During the summer season, it's also somewhat reasonable to even live there in certain places. Winter is horrible, but it's nowhere near the 100 Kelvin temperature, 200 degrees below 0 C, that you would have to endure on the moon every 2 weeks. So the costs of Antarctica versus the moon don't really compare. Now, one of the things that people often compare is the question concerning ownership of property, extraction of resources, things like that between Antarctica and the moon. And it's for different reasons, but the functional difference is minimal. Because of the treaties that all of the countries signed and the fact that all of the territory is covered by that same treaty means that Antarctica is forbidden from extracting resources. So there's no fight over the resources that are there. And there are some that are there, very interesting ones. There's oil and gas in Antarctica. And so all the countries involved decided to make it so that nobody could take anything from Antarctica. So it's meant to be pristine. So that means that the only thing that you can economically justify in Antarctica is McMurdo Station, which is a scientific research station. And so you will never see significant economic development of Antarctica. On the moon, there has been the Outer Space Treaty, and recently the United States has come up with something called the Artemis Accords, which allows for the idea similar to when you're fishing in the ocean. You can't own the ocean that's underneath you, but if you take a fish out of the ocean, you own the fish. And we're doing the same thing on the moon to kind of clarify the ability for someone to be able to go to the moon, extract the resources, and be able to use those to their benefit and make money on it. In some countries, there's something called the Moon Treaty that explicitly even forbids that. There are some suggestions that that just means we need to fix the Moon Treaty, but if anyone has been watching the treaties related to the Law of the Sea Treaty, that would probably be a 10 to 15 year process, and anyone making investments in that business is not interested in making no money for 15 years. So that's why for a lot of people that are looking for being able to develop lunar resources, the Artemis Accords really are a friendly way of moving forward that is cooperative, does preserve all of the peacemaking and consensus building aspects of the Outer Space Treaty, but provides a way forward for economic development. So in that sense, with the Artemis Accords, being able to extract resources and use them on the moon is actually a little bit clearer now than it is for Antarctica, because there is international consensus that economic development on Antarctica is just impossible right now, and will be probably for as long as anybody can tell. But there does appear to be a way forward with the moon.
Mm-hmm. Next question is from Nicholas Bennett. What can you see as the resource after water for propulsion that could help make cislunar operations cheaper?
There are some plans that actually use aluminum and oxygen as a propulsion system. So if you look at a lot of the rockets that fly out in Black Rock that the amateur high-powered rocketry community does, the primary, there's two components to those solid rocket motors that they use, one being ammonium perchlorate, but the other being powdered aluminum. That's what really gives you the oomph in those rocket motors. And so there are formulations that if you can separate the aluminum and the oxygen, you can create solid rocket motors. There is the idea that we've been working on in Waypaver, and others, even within the National Space Council, have been talking about, which is something called a strategic space propellant reserve was the original idea. And that included using NASA. NASA's actually already talked about this recently, of paying a particular price for water on the moon at a bulk rate. And there are other materials on the moon that are valuable as long as you step back a little bit and realize that there are other propulsion systems, methane. So you need the hydrogen, but you also need some carbon. And so there are other, once you have the carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and they're like, okay, what happens if I throw some nitrogen in there? Well, okay, what about some potassium and some sodium and a few other things? You now have all of the precursors for creating complex organic molecules, other types of things, that there are companies here on Earth that are working with the energy industry to capture what comes out of their smokestacks and turning that into feedstocks for creating plastics precursors, and even organic fertilizers and other ways of turning that waste into organic material. And so there are some ideas around using some basic lunar elements, not as propulsion, but as also to be able to make feedstocks for other things that you need to be able to move around in cislunar space. Because if you're moving humans, propulsion is not enough. You got to be able to feed them and help them breathe too.
Okay, next question from Arvin Tan. Will government contracts not be sufficient enough to jumpstart and sustain early lunar settlement development?
Not in the way that I think that we mean. So one of the things that I work on behalf of both Moon Society and Waypaver is the Alliance for Space Development. The Alliance is currently working with and speaking to House and Senate, well, Senate now that the House has passed the appropriations bill, on advocating for development of space. And the moon is part of that. Currently, the four things we're working on are lunar development, LEO commercialization, space-based solar power, and planetary defense through NEOSIM and some of the other Earth NEA observation programs. And what we have sort of discovered from talking to House members and staffers is they are open to the idea of something like the International Space Station on the moon, but there is significant bordering on completely skeptical idea that humans would be living in space in any significant number beyond the International Space Station. Every time we bring that up, the US government, and from what I hear from my European colleagues, and in Europe, that the idea of large numbers of human beings living in space, and I mean large, maybe a couple hundred, is something that is easily 300 to 500 years in the future, and so far beyond any current politician's timeline that they do not want to be seen allocating any taxpayer dollars to something that is so far in the future. And so, yeah, it makes great way to get your R&D funded, but to go back to what in my keynote was, we have to find customers that are not government, because governments don't do this. They did in the 1600s and 1700s, but they don't do it anymore.
Chris Richardson has a question and he's unmuted. Go ahead, Chris.
Hello, good morning. I have a couple of questions. One, there are ways that we can get an awful lot of this stuff back to Earth a lot cheaper than using fuels. How about mass drivers, for one? And one of the interesting things that we could do up there with a large 3D printer would be to start assembling, re-entry vehicles, lifting bodies made out of basaltic thread. You actually taking basaltic rock and melting it and turning it into thread to make re-entry vehicles that are one use only. Yes,
I agree that there are lunar to Earth re-entry systems. There's a launch company out in California called Spin Launch that is working on the idea of using very large evacuated centrifuge to be able to generate maybe 1.5 Mach first stage. So it's not a true single stage to orbit. It's a Earth-based first stage. It is questionable whether or not that makes economic sense on the Earth, but spin launch on the moon, great way to send back mass. Because the moon sits at the top of the gravity well, the cost of getting it back is not the cost driver that makes it prohibitive. It is the cost of getting the things up there that are going to be able to melt that basalt, to be able to extract the materials. It's the processes and infrastructure of being able to extract it, refine it, and turn it into that re-entry vehicle. And even then, depending on what you do, you don't even need a heat shield. If you can just give it a little bit of attitude control, you could drop it into the middle of the Mojave Desert and just go out with a pickup truck and pick it up. And if 30% of it ablates, you don't care. But the largest problem with, I think, everything that you just ran through is we currently do not have the technology to be able to build systems like that that can survive the lunar night. Lubricants freeze out.
Yes, I know.
Yeah, and so that is one of the bigger challenges. I just started getting into this myself and realizing that having your entire business model have to fit inside of a 2-week period is really difficult.
Yeah, but the thing is that most of your actual manufacturing and everything are going to be under the surface, not on the surface. that's been most of the problem, is that,
Yes, but
having it on the surface is living in a shooting range.
Correct.
Right. So you've got stuff coming in at ballistic speeds.
Right, but even if you get underground, the systems that we have terrestrially, that we know how to build mechanical systems that can survive even the temperatures below the surface. And you don't need very much regolith on top of you, because there's no atmosphere. So you're not conducting heat and cold, really, or lack of heat, through the atmosphere of the Earth. So that vacuum can help you in certain cases. But as anybody that's worked with cryogenic materials, valves and seals that work at cryogenic temperatures are cranky, and they are not long-lived. And so recently I was digging into some developments that were happening in 2018 around diamond-like carbon films that are self-lubricating at 100 Kelvin. And so there's some interesting developments that are happening, but no one that I'm aware of has actually started commercializing it for space applications. So there needs to be more work in this area, because if you are going to be trying to build systems that do extract that value, they have to be built almost, the phrase I use is TikTok. It's very mechanical. It's not highly scientific and engineered. It has to be something that runs off of springs and levers that not very fine and well engineered, highly accurate servo motors that we build down here. And so I think it's another degree of engineering. And I know there are a lot of people in NASA and other places that have been working on these problems for a long time. But to get to that profitability, I think that we need to take some of the engineering that has happened and start turning those into actual useful components that can work on the moon over year-long timeframes and multi-year timeframes without having to be serviced by a human.
Okay, next question is from Julian Miller. On order of magnitude, how much capital in total do you believe is required to kickstart a sustainable lunar economy?
That's a difficult question, because it's not a point number, because the analogy that I use for this a lot, and this is where I started my career a long time ago, was on the internet side. Back in the late 80s and early 90s, I was deeply involved in a lot of the internet development. Started out at Georgia Tech, but then ended up at a company called VeriSign, which still to this day, runs the .com domain namespace. And if you had asked us in 1991 how much money would it cost to build Google, I would like every single dime of the entire planet, because I would have to then build out many, many billions of dollars of fiber infrastructure and develop the iPhone and develop all the things that make Google what it is now. And so what I would, and it is the right term to kickstart, not fully develop, but just what does it take to be able to create that virtuous cycle? And I think that what we're talking about is not an outrageous amount of money at any one time. It is consistent money. So for example, the Commercial Lunar Payload Services budget in the current authorization appropriations bill was $256 million. And within NASA's budget, that is incredibly small. That's one small Explorer class mission beyond Earth. And you get an entire lunar lander program out of that. And that's one of the values you get about using commercial companies to do these things. You get significant cost savings. I'm just going to swag it. I think that if NASA and the US government, along with some international partners, one, understood that the goal is space development and settlement, which is really the hardest sell. And two, were to do it outside of NASA and ESA and and do it more as an economic industrial development program, then I'm thinking that probably on the order of maybe $2 to $3 billion a year total in cash outlay. But I think one of these biggest things that could help things is not actually providing cash, but providing loan guarantees. There are very large development banks out there who regularly fund things like airports and those really giant oil rigs you see out in the middle of the Northern Atlantic that just blow your mind in terms of the engineering involved to build those kind of things. And they cost a couple of $1 billion a piece. Those are privately financed, but in a lot of cases, there is government involvement, not in providing money, but in providing some base guarantees to the lender. And these lenders are used to timeframes between 30 and 50 years for those loans to fully mature. And even then, they're refinanced over and over again in that world, and they're comfortable with that. So the world understands how to incentivize and finance very long-term, very expensive projects. They just have to decide that this is something that they want to do. And that's the hardest sell.
Question from Stanley Max. Are there areas at and near the lunar poles that are permanently in sunlight?
Yes. And those are a lot more limited than the permanently shadowed regions. And they are also more valuable because when you're down there, power is at a premium. And so there are several proposals that basically stick mirrors up there and they shine light down into the craters to provide basically a fancy version of beam power. But there are so few of them that there is some thought among certain space policy in national defense circles that those are going to be contested areas. If the spots of eternal sunshine at the poles become contested areas because people want to use them, I would like to have that problem. There are certain problems that I call champagne problems. If I could have that problem, I would pop a bottle of champagne, I would be happy, because that means that people were developing it and found it valuable to be there. And that's a future I would like to be in, even if there was a little bit of fighting back and forth over who got to be in the top of one of those peaks.
Mm-hmm. Okay, are there any other questions from the audience? Okay, I don't see any at this point. I guess I'll throw one out there, Michael. How can nonprofits like the Moon Society help foster a cislunar economy?
I think that the best thing they can do, as I said, there needs to be a policy shift. So in the all the conversations I've had with the development banks, they're like, yeah, we could totally do what you're talking about. Either you can show me 10 years of steady 4% given what current interest rates, maybe even 3% return on a loan that I would make to somebody for developing a lunar base, which means you already have to have one and show them the proof you do it, or a government loan guarantee. I'd finance that all day long because I don't care what it is as long as you can give me that 4%. If you want a loan for, creating flying monkeys and you can give me my 4%, I don't care. But to do that, we either have to bootstrap it, which is incredibly hard, or we need to meet the finance industry where they live, which means we have to get the governments to provide those development guarantees. And that's where small organizations like ours, and the National Space Society and the Space Frontier Foundation and the Mars Society and all of the organizations, once we all get together and we all do things at the same time, people actually listen to us. And that's where I think that the number one thing that the 250 some odd participants that we have on this conference is, even if you're a congressperson or your representative, if you're in Europe or whatever, call them, tell them, because one of the things I've discovered is House and Senate members that work on NASA's budget rarely, if ever, hear from other House and Senate members that their constituents want something. And so they feel like they have a very free hand in doing what they're doing. And that's why a lot of times you get things that are very parochial, for jobs in my district. When another House or Senate member comes in and says, I'm getting phone calls from all of my constituents saying, we want this. Why aren't you doing it? Well, NASA and NASA's budgets and those jobs are important. But if someone who has never cared about NASA's budget calls them up and says, my constituents want this, and if you don't do it, I'm going to be annoyed at you. The cost of having another House or Senate member upset with you is higher than the cost of what they normally get from NASA. So political pressure, especially through House and Senate members that don't normally care about NASA, can actually be very effective. So as soon as everybody gets done with the conference, go find out who your House and Senate members are and give them a call. Especially if you're in the Senate. The Alliance for Space Development is currently doing meetings with Senate staffers. If you want to participate, go to the allianceforspacedevelopment.org and sign up. And we will find a Senate member that is in your state, and you can be involved in those meetings with staffers. And so I would definitely sign up for that as one of the best ways, because the Alliance is for space development. It's not about jobs. It's not about anything else. It's about developing space the way we're talking about right now. And this is probably one of the most effective things you can do.
Okay, looks like we have time for one last question, and then we have Sean Mahoney on deck. So the last question is going to be from Ken Golkin. What could a moon rover discover on the surface of the moon that could create something equivalent to the Klondike Gold Rush, but to the moon?
I'm going to have to go back and riff on Dennis Wingo's PGMs a little bit. Pretty much anything that is very rare here or is very destructive to find and extract here. So rare earth metals, but that's from a strategic standpoint, which can work sometimes. Basically PGMs, platinum group metals, because those are just hard to extract here. And all the places that we find PGMs on Earth are former meteorite strikes. And so if we can find them on the moon and get them, but that's still a hard sell. You have to figure out a way to build up that infrastructure that makes it cost effective to do. Just because as soon as you start bringing it back, the prices are going to drop, which is what you want to do, because you're enabling new things that you can do with these materials that previously we've never been able to do. And so you have to ride the curve. It's not going to stay static. And that's the challenge. But I think one of the most valuable things that you could find on the moon is something fun. Something, and this is one of the things I harp on, is everything we do is so incredibly boring right now to the average human being. I want, and I've talked to Sean about this, I want somebody to build little robots, usually about maybe this size, that look just like what the little character you play on Minecraft. And you know, it may not survive the lunar night, but it can go inside a little garage and kind of sleep when it's cold and go back out during the sunshine. And it can go out and make blocks. It had like a the trash compactor robot. You know, pick up a group of regolith, make a block, make the block about this size, and stack them. And you know, then turn a game into it and turn it over to a bunch of kids. That to me, both in the PR, the robotics development, the scalability, the ease at which anybody going to the moon could just take a handful of these with them and just let them loose. I think we need to be able to play on the moon more than we do. I still, one of the things that people still talk about the Apollo missions was, I can't remember who did it, but playing golf on the moon. You know, we need to play more. So that's it.